We are really, really excited to welcome two incredible panelists. They work with an organization called Seamless Bay Area, an organization actually that Forward Party of California greatly, greatly supports. So we're really excited to just host this conversation and give them a platform to tell you a little bit about public transit. A quick disclaimer, our panelists have graciously volunteered their time to be here with you tonight. They are expressing their own opinions. They're speaking on behalf of themselves. They are not speaking on behalf of an organization necessarily. There's no implied endorsement either way between Forward and whatever policy proposals that they will recommend tonight. This is just meant to be a night of education and conversation. So before we hear from our panelists, I would like to quickly kick it off with a quick introduction of the hosts of tonight's conversation, the Forward Party of California. And in order to do so, I'm gonna throw a little something on the screen for you all to see. So hopefully in just a few moments, you will be able to see it. Full screen slideshow mode. All right, so welcome everybody. This is the agenda for tonight. We're going to be having some speaker introductions in just a few minutes, followed by a panel conversation, which can go anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, followed by an audience Q&A, which we have plenty of time dedicated for, and then we'll have some final closing remarks and we'll let you go for the night. But first, let me introduce Forward California. A lot of you on this call already, I know, are very intimately familiar with Forward Party of California. And maybe some of you are curious about Forward California, and maybe some of you have never even heard of it before. This is your first exposure to Forward. So let me just introduce to you quickly who we are. The Forward Party of California is a brand new aspiring California political party, and we consider ourselves to be the party of the future. We advocate for solutions that are innovative, collaborative, and most importantly, pragmatic and responsible. Ultimately, we strive to, if there's one thing you'll remember from this slide, it's this. We strive to fix the system, serve the people, and build the future. So, now that we know everything that we frankly need to know about the Forward Party of California, let's get to the good stuff, which is public transit. What is going on with transit? Although I can't see you on the screen, please type into the chat or raise your hand if you've ever ridden on a train before. And if you have, where was that train? Was it BART in the Bay Area? Was it the Metro in LA? Did you take Eurolink or Eurostar to get from Paris to London or London to Paris? Whether it was to get to work or to avoid traffic, tolls, parking, maybe you wanted to get into San Francisco and not worry about parking your car and paying 60 bucks for parking. Trains can be a wonderful means of transportation for millions of people. In California specifically, every single day there are over 100 flights daily between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Every single day. And not to mention all of the traffic on Highway 5. You would think that this means we are prime real estate for, let's say, high-speed transit between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Thank you, everyone. I'm seeing BART, LA Metro, Caltrain. People have a lot of experience with transit on this call. To sum it up, California is a great place to talk about transit. But for some reason, it just doesn't feel like it's happening. It doesn't feel like we're moving forward with transit. And the question is why? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor on to our two incredible panelists, Adina and Ian from Seamless Bay Area, to give a quick 1 or so minute introduction about who they are, the work they do, and what they're passionate about. And then we will move on into the fireside style Q&A chat. So first, let me pass the floor on to Adina.
Hi, yes. Along with Ian, I'm a co-founder of Seamless Bay Area and executive director. And we started Seamless Bay Area because public transportation in the Bay Area is really so key to our environmental goals and having housing goals and just having our places be good places to live. And yet public transportation in the Bay Area in particular was very disjointed and not as convenient as it should be. and we did some work on figuring out why, and then have been working on solutions at the regional and state level. And I will hand it over to Ian to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian Griffiths. I live in San Francisco, and I co-founded Seamless Bay Area alongside Adina. That was back in 2017. Um, I've worked I'm an urban planner, and I've worked in the field of public transportation and urban planning. I had worked in that field for about more than 12 years. And for me, getting involved in co-founding a nonprofit came from both my love of public transportation. Obviously, I'm passionate about it. I want to see it be better. That's why I entered this field. But it was also based on my professional experience, working in the Bay Area, working for BART for a number of years, working in consulting for a number of years, and then having the opportunity to actually leave the Bay Area and working in Canada in the Greater Toronto region for a couple of years, at a pretty exciting time in the Toronto region, for one of the main regional authorities called Metrolinx. That was back in between 2012 and 2015. When they had a very ambitious vision. They still do, but there's sort of so much going on there. It was really inspiring, and it was really moving back to the Bay Area moving back to California in 2015, where I really started to ask myself, why aren't we firing on all cylinders in this state? What is at the core of our challenges? Why don't we have this sort of momentum and leadership that I witnessed and that I experienced directly in the Greater Toronto region? And that led me to sort of meet other advocates, trying to find people who were working in this space, trying to learn more about the nonprofits that were active in this area to really understand these issues. And sort of then they kind of accidentally fell into founding a nonprofit, because it felt like there wasn't a group that was really hitting on some of the core issues that were at the heart of why public transit isn't world-class in the Bay Area, in spite of the fact that we do fund it. We vote with we tax ourselves to fund public transit. We've done it over and over again, and yet we don't seem to get the results that a lot of us expect. And so to finish my bio, I worked and co-led the organization as staff alongside Adina for about 5 years. And then about a year ago, I stepped away from a staff role. I'm still on the board of Seamless Bay Area, but I'm back in consulting. And Adina is sort of leading the charge, at least in terms of staff of Seamless Bay Area. And I'm here just more as a board member and a historical emeritus person in the organization.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for the intros. We cannot wait to pick your brains tonight. And Forward California is really grateful to be a part of the wonderful Seamless Bay Area network. And before we get started, I realized maybe I should give a quick introduction of who I am as well. Hello, my name is Sarah. I am one of 3 elected co-chairs for the Forward Party of California. The second of 3 co-chairs, Rick, is also on this call. He's going to be doing a lot of the back-end technical support to ensure that this call is seamless and smooth. So on that note, whenever you have a question during the duration of this conversation, either you can use the Q&A function that's built into the Zoom webinar to throw your question in there, and Rick will either answer it if it's one that we can quickly answer, or he'll flag it for our panelists during the Q&A portion. Or you can throw your question also into the chat. We can also get your question that way. I'm in the Bay Area, and we have some wonderful board members all over the state of California. I'm super passionate about public transit, and that really came from running for a local office. I ran in 2022. I didn't win, but it got me really, really passionate about local and regional issues, public transit being one of them. So very excited to host this conversation. All right, well, without further ado, let's get to it. First question, first and most fundamentally, Adina and Ian, can you please tell us a little bit more about Seamless Bay Area, why you founded it? I know you kind of touched on it during your personal introductions, but also, can you tell us exactly what problem you're trying to solve? And if you do any work beyond just the Bay Area, since we have callers in here tonight from all over the state of California.
Yes. So we'll start to speak to this with a visual, because the Bay Area in particular had some pretty distinctive challenges when we got started, where the public transportation system in the Bay Area is really kind of notoriously fragmented, with 27 transit agencies that historically had very little coordination, separate planning, different fares, disconnected schedules, and that made the system harder to use, made trips slower and uncompetitive. And that really suppressed the utility for people, such that before COVID, only about 5% of trips or 10% of to 12% of commute trips were on transit, and we weren't getting the money that the value out of the money that we were spending. And so this is something that when you talk to an ordinary person, people are like, it shouldn't be that way. It should be more convenient. And so what we did, and this is Ian's excellent visualization work, we started to communicate a vision of a system that worked differently, with a system that was strategically planned at a regional level to work as a system. One of the things when you look at this graphic that you do not see anymore is logos. Transit agencies may exist behind the hood, but those agencies are working together to operate different parts of a well-integrated network where the service quality and fares and schedules and signs are standardized and simple and reliable for users. And to make that work, that does imply funding for service, because you can't have a seamless system if your buses and trains are not running frequently. And this is something that when any of us go traveling, we experience around the world and say, this is really how I want it to be. And then we think as Americans, well, is it because we have a car culture here? Is there something special in the water that it just works? And the answer is no. There are patterns, there are policies, there are things that people do that make it happen, that we have learned from in the Bay Area and are working increasingly to help get adopted in California. Hand it over to Ian.
Yeah, so just to be clear, our vision is a world-class, easy-to-use public transit system that makes you want to use transit. In case I feel like we might have skipped over that, as our name suggests, our vision alongside that map is a system that you want to use, that is easy to use, and that gets far more people riding transit because it's actually convenient, not because they're being punished into doing it. It's the most practical and pragmatic and easy way of doing that, and that involves, not only funding it appropriately, but really focusing on the user experience of all the things that go into making to choosing public transit. So we've done a lot of research of global best practices in transit. I've had the opportunity through Seamless to actually go on several study delegations to Switzerland, to Korea, to Taiwan, and to Sweden to not only ride these systems, but actually meet the practitioners who are working in and who have designed the systems and the processes and the sort of governance and funding frameworks that are involved in delivering high quality transit. So what we see is there's quite a few different ways of organizing transit, but there are some common characteristics of high ridership, thriving public transit systems that have increasing transit use, that have proven to be resilient, even post-pandemic, even in an era where there's far more people working from home. These world-class systems still have tons of people using transit. They have not been supplanted by remote work. They have not been supplanted by autonomous vehicles. So some of the common things we see are plentiful, frequent service across key corridors that's serving a wide variety of trip purposes, not just getting into downtowns, but actually getting between neighborhoods and community centers. So thinking about designing high frequency, high quality corridors as an entire network, competitive, reliable travel speeds, meaning buses don't get stuck in traffic. So that's a really important thing that is a common policy, because not everything can be a train, not everything can be a grade separated subway. Even when we have lots, even in the above left image is Seoul, and Seoul has a lot of subways. But what's surprising, that was surprising to me when I went to Seoul, is the sheer quantity of buses that you pretty much, like, at least 50% of the vehicles that you see are actually on surface streets, and they have dedicated lanes, and they're very fast as well, and they work seamlessly with buses. And then, the third feature is really an excellent customer experience that's coordinated across all types of transportation, all agencies, rail, buses, ferries, other modes that you might see. Really something that really gives you the freedom as a rider to use all the things you would need to use that are not necessarily a car. And also when use a car when you need to. I think this is something we see in many places, is that high ridership does not necessarily mean no car ownership or no car access at all. It just means that you use a car when it is practical to do so, but you're not forced to for every single type of trip that you make. And then lastly, I want to highlight that this coordination and all of these features are associated with a fundamentally different way of governing transit that is led by a regional authority called a network manager. So this is basically a regional level of government that is at the scale of the metropolitan region, that oversees all of the transit agencies that might operate in the specific region. So within the Bay Area, there are 27 of them. In Switzerland, for example, in the greater Zurich area, which is the image on the two images on the bottom here, there's about 30. But there's a governing entity that oversees the entire network of them, so that the user doesn't see the complexity. They just see a simple user interface. They see coordination between the services, and that's a really fundamental policy difference between how these other world-class systems are organized versus us in California. So it's something that to give you a preview, it's something that we've been working on in the Bay Area, but we also think it's a really important policy across all regions, within California, the LA region, the San Diego region, the Sacramento region, thinking about what are the metropolitan regions that are sort of the commute sheds or the travel sheds across the state, and governing and organizing transportation at that scale, rather than the scale where we tend to govern it right now, which is often somewhat arbitrarily. It's sometimes you have municipalities each have their own transit system. Then you have a variety of regional agencies that might cross borders, like Caltrain, like BART, like Metrolink in Southern California. And you have just such a wide variety of entities, and no clarity on who's responsible for organizing, coordinating all of them. And as a result, the funding that we put towards public transit doesn't go as far as it should, because it's being spent on oftentimes not, it's sort of, imagine we've got a symphony and we've got a lot of people playing instruments, but we don't really have a conductor that's actually coordinating all the instruments. So the sound that we get is not a beautiful piece of music, but it's uncoordinated, and it's disconnected, and it doesn't really work to its full potential. Okay, and I covered that in I think already. This concept of a network manager is something that we see in places that do have lots of local jurisdictions, that do have lots of transit agencies. They exist across Europe. There's several models in Canada that we've seen. It can be done even, and I know you've got a question about funding coming up, but it can be done even in a context where we might have lots of different sources of funding that are funding our transit system. So I feel like we've given you the overview of Seamless. We could probably maybe go back to some of your questions, unless there's something else that you wanted to add, Adina.
I can give some examples of some of the progress that we've made over since we started down this path. I will skip some of these slides. I'll skip some of these. We'll talk about funding in a little bit. But one of the examples, as we've been working on making the fare system more coordinated, is a tremendous success has been the Bay Area now has an all agency transit pass in a pilot phase. And the outcome of that is has been a 30 to 35% increase in transit use amongst the participants in that pilot. It started at public colleges and universities and then expanded to employers and transportation management associations that provide transportation benefits for employers and sometimes for geographical areas. And it really increases the amount of transit used. It increases the amount of transfers that people use. And in those colleges and universities, it helped students stay in school, where the students were less likely to leave the university because it was so much easier to get back and forth. Um, the Bay Area has started to coordinate schedules around the region, looking a couple of times a year at ways of improving transfers and saving 10, 15, 20 minutes that people don't have to wait anymore. And in order to keep this going, the Bay Area does need funding to do it. And funding is, in general, a theme of something that is needed to have world-class public transit. And we can, I guess if you want to ask some more questions, we can get to the funding topic.
Wonderful. Thank you guys. We will definitely touch on funding a little bit later, but right now I'm going to ask a few more warm-up questions about transit at large, more generally. So feel free to stop share so we could see your beautiful faces bigger, and then we can always share again if needed. I have a very fundamental question for you, and it's not necessarily about like regional agencies or Seamless specifically, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that train ridership has seen a decline since the pandemic and hasn't fully recovered. And A, that's very unfortunate because people aren't leaning on transit as much as they used to. And B, it makes me wonder the financial impact to these agencies since they're seeing a drastic, maybe not drastic, but a decline in ridership. And possibly they're making riding trains more expensive, which seems to be a step in the wrong direction. So, my first question for you both, feel free, anyone who wants to take it, is it true that these transit authorities have seen a drop in ridership since the pandemic? And what can we and what can the agencies do about it so that we can reverse course?
All right, so I'm gonna start, and if someone knows LA Metro off the top of their head or can look it up while I talk, that will be helpful because I actually don't know that off the tip of my tongue. But I do have the Bay Area data, and that is definitely true in the Bay Area where ridership plummeted when anyone that did not absolutely have to be out of the house was supposed to be staying at home. And since then, there has been a gradual return in ridership, but overall, it's over 2/3 now, but not back to where it was before. Unfortunately, as Ian was indicating earlier on, there is a recipe for having a high ridership system. That recipe is not complicated. It is having that frequent and well-connected service. And there are multiple regions around the world. Vancouver is one that has a similar work from home rate to the Bay Area that has fully recovered its ridership. In Sweden, likewise, very high, similar work from home level, and also has fully recovered ridership, and that is with frequent service, well-connected, well-connected, fast and frequent service, and that is the recipe for ridership. But go ahead, Ian.
Well, I was just going to say, so ridership, let's just say overall in the state, I think the national average for ridership is around 75% of pre-pandemic levels. So in the Bay Area, it's a little lower. I think LA might be around average. And I know in the Bay Area, we're up to about, I think it's a little higher because that was January. I think we're back up to 70%. So that has a big revenue impact on agencies because about a quarter of the revenue that funds transit comes from fares. So transit is subsidized at different levels throughout the state. And there's every single agency has a different funding mix. So there's local sales taxes, there's some state funding sources, but fares are an important part. And here in the Bay Area, it's about 25%. I think in LA, it's a little lower. So at 75%, if ridership has only come back to 75% and fares made up 25% of that, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, basically, of lost revenue, of shortfalls that are very, very significant. You can see that translates to that drop in revenue translates to 23% of Muni's budget or 35% of BART's budget. So these are very, very significant budget shortfalls and LA Metro is, other agencies throughout the state, including LA Metro, are forecasting similar budget shortfalls. So this drop in ridership, as well as increase in costs at agencies, so that's the other side of the ledger, have created what you might have read about as called sort of a fiscal cliff situation, where we don't have the revenue to keep these systems going at the level they have. The reason why you've seen probably some cuts across the state since the pandemic, but largely no major cuts because of several rounds of federal relief funding and then state relief funding. So the CARES Act, as well as a couple of other bills, have kept transit agencies providing near complete levels of service for the past 5 years. And then a couple of years ago, advocacy groups, including ours, as well as several across the state, mobilized to get the state to continue funding that. But all of those efforts are sort of running out. And one of the things that has happened as a result of that budget crisis was the creation 2 years ago of something called the State Transit Transformation Task Force. So when they provided about $2 billion worth of relief for public transit agencies to help them kind of get through this period, the state legislature said, we need to take a bigger look at how we organize public transit in the state, how we fund it. And that was called that task force, Transit Transformation Task Force. And that has just wrapped up, actually. So there's a set of recommendations that are coming out of the state now on how we can improve the customer experience of transit, how we can perhaps reform it, and also recommendations on creating a potentially new source of state funding that could help fund transit at a statewide level.
And so picking up from that thread, Sarah, the point that you made to start with was very important because you can't have high ridership if you don't have the service. So cutting service and raising fares is a recipe for a declining system that has fewer riders. And so there is, in the Bay Area in particular, there was an important step taken this year that folks from the Bay Area have the opportunity to, first of all, understand what's going on, and secondly, to potentially get involved with, which was to pass a bill that authorized a regional transit funding measure. So instead of taking that fragmented approach and having a ballot measure for BART and a ballot measure for Caltrain and a ballot measure for et cetera, for each agency facing a financial problem, there is a ballot measure authorized by Senate Bill 63, which will prevent steep cuts for the agencies facing the most serious financial problems in 5 counties, San Francisco, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. And this will be a 14-year sales tax. It'll be higher in San Francisco because SFMTA has particular problems because of San Francisco's challenges during the pandemic, and also um, SFMTA got a significant amount of its funding from the city's general fund. So if you think about the impact of the pandemic on San Francisco and the city general fund, they have extra challenges, and there's going to be, I don't think anybody here said that they were in San Francisco proper. San Francisco is going to have a second ballot measure as well. This bill authorized a citizens initiative. That means a signature gathering campaign, which can allow a ballot measure to pass with 50% plus one of the vote. And there's some details that if people ask questions about, we can address them. And this funding, in addition to keeping the transit agencies running, will also fund some of those seamless transit improvements. It'll fund the fare integration programs that have been moving forward, including free and reduced price transfers, standardized mapping and wayfinding, transit priority, making transit faster and more reliable, and accessibility improvements as well. So this is something that is very important for the Bay Area. And in addition to, and that though, in addition to the Bay Area stepping up and making sure that we keep our transit system running and keep that progress toward a seamless system, for the statewide audience on this call, the state of California has historically underinvested in running transit service compared to other states with major public transportation systems. Chicago just stepped up, and Chicago was facing a fiscal cliff in its metro area, and they just provided more state funding. And whether we're talking about New York, New Jersey, Boston, they have all funded transit service more historically than what we did in California. And that's one of the recommendations from the state task force for California to step up. Major metros in Canada fund about 50% more transit per capita, more service per capita than we do, for example, in the Bay Area. And there's a direct correlation between the amount of service and the amount of ridership. So I will stop there. We'll get to more about what you can do, I think, later on in the conversation, but we can happy to take some more questions.
Awesome, thank you. So the questions have started rolling into the Q&A. We're going to start addressing those around 8 o'clock, so keep them coming. Guys, whenever you have a question pop into your head, throw it into the Q&A function. We will answer them around 8 o'clock. So we're going to take a quick break from like the funding conversation. We're going to get back to it. But right now I have a very different question for you two. And it's around public opinion. And I think it's something that some people have started asking about in the chat as well. The first question is, and they're two very complementary questions, so I'm just going to ask them together and then you guys can answer them. The first is, from my personal anecdotal experience, not from any surveys or any data or any research I've done, it appears that a lot of people have stopped riding, for example, BART or other types of, trains and transit because they don't feel safe on them anymore. And to that point, it seems that there's a lot of interesting public opinion around people not actually even wanting trains passing through their suburban communities because it'll bring, traffic, it'll bring crime, it'll bring this, it'll bring that, and blah, blah, blah. It takes away like the space, the land for other things. So my questions for you guys are, how do we, based on, your research, how can we address people's sense of safety on trains? And is there any truth to the concerns that a lot of suburban people in the Bay Area have around having transit in their backyard? And if so, how can we address those things?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go and share that screen again, because what that was showing is actually brand new polling data. it is such brand new polling data that I don't think it's quite public yet. It's going to be posted, I think, by the end of this week for some public meetings next week. But this is relating to the Bay Area ballot measure, and it is showing, pretty consistently in the Bay Area that people in general do support public transportation. They do want to see oversight on how public money is spent. They want oversight on cleanliness and safety. They want it to be reliable. They want it to be cost effective and efficient. They want it to be fast and connected. So they do want to be able to get from place to place. That was polling at 85%. Um, and people do not, 80% of people wanted to prevent cuts, 80 or 81, depending on how you ask. So like there is definitely overall broad support, and that continues as of the freshest polling. And that has been consistent, including people supporting public transportation and wanting it to get better and more coordinated and faster and more reliable. This is a little bit hard to read, but the 2023 poll is very similar to the brand new poll. Um, in terms of the rider stats, we do have, this is going to be some Bay Area centric stats, where there were some challenges in the depths of the pandemic when, a lot of people were staying home and people who had nowhere else to be were using the public transportation system. And that, did cause real challenges. And the agencies have been really putting in effort to improve the safety and the cleanliness. And that is really bearing out in public opinion for some of the agencies that did have those reputational challenges and actual challenges. So in the most recent polling, 72% of customers said that SFMTA Muni in San Francisco was good or excellent, and that was the highest result that they have had in 20 years. At BART, crime was down last year, 17% from the previous year, and customer satisfaction is at the highest level in 10 years. And so this is something where the agencies have been putting in the time and the work, and that has been paying off in the customer satisfaction overall. And I will share a thought and would welcome any more thoughts. But I think one thing, if somebody says like, "Oh my gosh, I am terrified of riding BART," you can say, "Hey, I am going to the theater and a museum and a music. Come with me." And it's really good. Come and try it for yourself. So go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can just add.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a couple of other different thoughts. So yeah, I mean, we all hear it. We all hear comments. People, you hear those comments all the time. And there are, if you ride public transit, you probably have had your own experiences that you understand where that is coming from, people's lack of sense of safety. And there was there was I think a trough kind of during the depths of the pandemic where there were actual increased levels of crime. Like the data showed that there were more incidents. So a lot of the measures that Adina was speaking to have really improved the situation. I know that's true in LA. I know LA Metro has been deploying a lot of resources towards ambassadors on their system, safety and security measures. The Bay Area has been installing new fare gates. There's been a lot of focus on this thing because public opinion polling, not just of customers, but of generally of the entire population, has shown that there are people who are staying away, and they're citing safety concerns as the reason why they're staying away. Interestingly, when you survey riders, I don't have the specific numbers, but I have seen survey data that asks riders and non-riders how safe they perceive public transit to be. And what's interesting is the riders perceive transit to be far safer. than the non-riders. So that's the people who are not using it, who have, the people who are actually using it are far more likely to view it as safe. And you'd think they would know because they're actually using it first. So there's a lot of bias. So there's a lot of people who have like, who just aren't using it, who perceive it to be unsafe because they may have read something or might have heard something from a friend, but they haven't had these direct experiences. So to Adina's point, I think kind of getting people to just use the system is one thing to get over, but the experience has to be good. I think it's important to say, if you write it once and something happens that makes you question whether to do it again, that's not a good experience. So we have to make, I think it's all part of have agencies being more customer focused and invest in continuing to do the things, and acknowledging when something happens and being honest and transparent about how they're going to make it better, and acknowledging solutions that actually work. I think there's there's a big debate over whether fare gates were going to make a difference in crime, and there was a lot of kind of discussion saying, well, that's actually not the source of the problem. Well, it's pretty compelling data that BART, when they installed higher fare gates, like it pretty much rate of every single type of crime in the system went down, as well as and it came through in people's perceptions of the system. So those are the types of things that I think are really good for building public confidence. They're important things to continue doing. But safety is absolutely fundamental to get. It has to be a safe experience if we expect people to ride. And I know across California, that's not always the case.
Thank you both. And I want to echo and like draw special attention to something that both of you have said, which is that we all here, all of us on this call, do have a role to play in influencing public opinion of public transit. I love public transit, and sometimes I'll bring it up or it'll come up in a group conversation and I'll say, I love taking BART into the city, into San Francisco. And I'm met with a little bit of like, I've never heard someone say love and BART in the same sentence. But like when you normalize it and when you express its like advantages, I think you give other people permission to explore the same ideas. And also to your point, being a buddy or a plus one for someone's first train experience in the Bay Area or in LA or in San Diego or whatever, I think is a great idea, because it's one thing to advocate for it and to tell people to use it, but to lead by example and by partnership. Hey, why don't you come to San Francisco with me on BART, and we'll literally be steps away from the San Francisco Symphony or from the Bill Graham Auditorium. It'll be so easy. We won't have to pay for parking. I think that's just such a good way to demonstrate the advantages of transit. And once you're hooked, you're hooked.
And if I could add just one more thing, is to say that the safety of public transit is far safer than driving. And I think that's always something to remind people that if their alternative is, the likelihood of, oh yeah, there's the data. If you're concerned, there's feelings of safety, but then if there's the actual data of like, well, what is the likelihood that something would happen that would imperil your safety? And that is you're far more likely to get injured or, God forbid, killed per vehicle mile traveled in an automobile. It's the number one source. Like vehicle deaths are one of the biggest sources of unnatural death in the country. And it's not people think it in a sometimes the feeling of choosing not to take transit feels like you might be making the safer choice, but in reality, our public health would be far better if everyone took public transit, and we would have far fewer people getting injured and killed if more people use transit, walking, biking, and other sort of sustainable modes.
Yeah, and there's the rational, there's the data that we just spoke to But there's also the experience. And one thing that we've been doing in the Bay Area and also partnering in Southern California in the LA and San Diego areas more recently is Transit Month. And that is a month-long celebration of public transportation. And now I've got the Bay Area map, but it was happening all over the state in Northern and Southern California this past year, where there are dozens and dozens of events and activities um, celebrating public transportation, taking the train and the bus to go for a hike, taking the ferry to go to the Rosie the Riveter Museum. In the Bay Area alone, we had 87 events in all 9 Bay Area counties. And this is a really good example, a good way to experience yourself and invite other people to experience, and something that groups can do to sponsor events and activities to help more people have this experience. So it's not just like, here's the stats and the figures and the data, but here's actually what it's like and the fun things that you can do.
Love, love, love it. I think adding some kind of like festivity around transit is such a good way to increase public opinion. And I really was moved by that safety slide because I think everyone feels safer having control of their automobile and maybe being alone and listening to their podcast and whatever. It's just a comfortable environment. But numbers tell a story. And before I move on, I want to do a little show and tell. We only have 10 minutes until Q&A, but this is very, very important because of something that you said about Transit Month. So I want to just take a moment to share with you all that Bart has ugly Christmas sweaters every year. And I think this is such a great conversation starter for anyone in the Bay Area or not in the Bay Area. I wore it on the Central Coast and I got people talking about trains. So have some swag, buy a sticker, put it on your water bottle. It's a great way to start a conversation. All right. Reminder, if you have a question, throw it into the Q&A function. We're going to get to Q&A in less than 10 minutes. In those less than 10 minutes, let's talk about the thing that we've all been waiting for, which is funding and policy. I'll just go ahead and ask the questions and then give you the floor for the rest of the time. Basically, what we want to know is how are transit agencies and transit projects funded in California? It looks like about 25% of agency funding comes from fares. How else would we break that down? And then also, what types of policy are currently going through the California state legislature or maybe local like community legislatures to advance the development and maintenance of good transit? And what can we on a local level, also like on a personal individual level, do to advocate for these policies?
Ian, do you want to start with how it's funded, and I'll talk about some of the policy opportunities for the coming year and onward.
Yeah. So if you want to bring up that prior slide, the one that had all the bar charts including the ones with other regions. So in terms of, there's 2 types. First of all, I want to distinguish between there's sort of 2 types of funding that when we talk about public transit. There's operating funding, operations funding, and capital funding. And capital funding is the funding that is used to build new extensions, new, like basically, it's not entirely to build new things, but it's really to build things. And it could, or to purchase new train cars or to purchase buses. But the vast majority of, that's just sort of almost like one-time funding is capital funding that's used once to sort of build a new station, and then that's it. The other type of funding is operating funding, and operating funding is the funding that pays the drivers, that pays for the maintenance, and that's the thing that needs to be pretty consistent year after year to be able to run service. and that is where we're facing this major financial crisis right now. There isn't we should we need more capital funding, but 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 right now the sort of existential crisis that we have right now is with operating funding. So where does operating funding come from for transit in California? So you can see here you've got LA Metro, SFMTA, and BART as 3 examples on this. Those are the California regions. That's not everyone, but you can see federal funding is quite insignificant, if not even visible, in fact, on this. So the fact that the federal administration almost has no impact on our transit system, which right now is probably a good thing. But you can see that fares, I think on average, BART had a very large share of shares, but the average rate across all agencies is about 25%, at least. LA Metro is probably looking more like 20% in there. But the biggest source is local funding. So state, sorry, I'm jumping all over this. The light blue is state funding. So that's looks like about 20%. That can be a higher share for some smaller transit agencies. But I think the average across California is you've got like about 50% coming from some kind of local funding source, say like a local sales tax, a local ballot measure, a special purpose. BART has its own like tax that if you live in the BART district that funds it. You've got some, and you've got fares and state funding. So those are the 3 main sources: fares, state, and local funding. And that's why at the state, to just go back to the opportunities to advocate for more funding to address the funding shortfalls. There's a push for a new statewide source of funding that is something that would lift all boats in California. So the last time the state approved a new source of statewide funding, I believe, was in the 90s. And it still doesn't make up a very significant share of the overall funding mix, especially when you compare, on this chart, the California regions to other states like New Jersey or to Philadelphia, to Pennsylvania. So I think that's a major opportunity to advance new funding. But then, and the other thing that anyone I think across California can do is advocate for additional local funding. And the opportunity here in the Bay Area that's coming up is the regional ballot measure, SB 63, that Adina was talking about before. San Diego, I know, really tried to pass a ballot measure. I believe it was last year or 2 years ago. That would have been, I can't remember what the name of it was called, but it was a local sales tax. And it failed, unfortunately, but it was pretty close. So I think that's I'm sure something that will.
I think they're planning on bringing it back.
That will come back. That would be, and I know I don't know as much about the LA, the latest. I know the LA County has been discussing a future measure, but really these local taxes and then a statewide tax are the big opportunities for transformation in the next couple of years.
So we've been talking about operating funding and making sure the services continue to run and potentially become more frequent. The other key category of funding is capital funding. This is for, extending, like LA has been extending a lot of light rail lines. In the state, we're trying to build a high-speed rail system. The Caltrain was just electrified over 50 miles, and the state has a plan to do, I think, 2,500 miles of electrification, if I'm remembering this right. So we have a lot of capital projects that we want to build, and this is an area where California in particular and the US in general pays more than we should. It costs too much. It takes too long. And so thinking about what are some opportunities for policy reforms in California. This is an area where there's been a lot of study of best practices around the world and opportunities to implement those best practices in California. Um, and through a lot of it is going to be through legislation. Some of it is going to be through administrative reforms. So one really important set of practices based on those, internationally, how people do these things well and cost effectively is planning. Like in California, in the US, we tend to think about a transit or a rail project as, we just want to add a line, we want to add an extension. And we want a thing, we want something that a politician can cut a ribbon for and feel good about having. But the international good practice is thinking about the goal is the service. I want to help the passenger get from point A to point B in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And I want this system to work as a system. So I want someone to be able to get from point A to point B in 30 minutes, even if that includes a transfer and it's in more than one agency. And so it is about thinking about the service as the product and then developing the plans in order to make specific improvements in the service, which is a much more cost-effective way of planning and delivering than what we are traditionally used to um, in California. And this is a very data-driven approach where you measure the amount of time it takes to get places. You measure delay and congestion, and then plan improvements that can be some of them can be very small. Move where the bus stops from here to there so that people can make that transfer, and that enables the person to get to where they're going 15 minutes faster. And so by being very, very analytical about it, um, someone who was until recently the head of SFMTA calls this a license to print money by taking this analytical approach and planning based on the service goal and planning the improvements starting with the least expensive. Instead of saying, okay, I want to have a subway, which is cost billions of dollars, you look at what are the most cost-effective things that you can do. You can move a bus stop, you can change the light timing, and then maybe you want to put in a bus lane, and then maybe you want to do a BRT system or a subway. So you look at what's the most cost-effective way that you can get a given desired improvement. And this service-led planning is something that is, in theory, the way that state rail projects are supposed to work. But one really important reform is to make that mandated in practice by tying this practice into how state projects are funded. Another issue, which we're also familiar with probably in the housing space, is permitting, where it can take much too long to have projects get permits. And that causes the projects to go up. So LA Metro serves 88 cities, and they have a really difficult time even having standard information about how each city manages their roads to be able to extend, speed up buses in those cities. In the high speed let's see, there was a project in Monterey Salinas Transit where they paid $10 million extra and lost federal funding because of permitting delays. There was a bill, SB 445, in the legislature last year. It was controversial. It got some pushback because every city wants to be able to do things in their own very special way. This bill is going to come back, and this is going to be an opportunity to support permitting reform. There are a couple of more opportunities for legislative reforms. One reason why we pay too much is that we fund projects when the project might be only at 5% design. And then look, they try to design it a little bit more and realize, oh my goodness, we didn't think of things. We have to do it a totally different way and redesign it. And if you look in the world where they do things more cost effectively, they fund projects when it is more fully designed. That is a reform that will probably take more than 1 year to get through in California, but it is not too early to start educating about how this is done. Another way of making sure that projects are done more cost effectively is to have consistent program funding to modernize the infrastructure over time. So in Europe, they typically have 5 to 10 year programs that they provide consistent program funding instead of having one project having to go for spot grants year after year after year, which causes delays. So these kinds of funding reforms, this also may take us more than 1 year, but paying attention to funding reform is a really ripe opportunity, especially the national environment of constrained funding and the state environment of some constrained funding. It is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to really do put pressure on being more cost effective. And last but not least, one of the things that we do differently than other places, and it's a little bit counterintuitive, is we need to have more state capacity in order to do things well. So if anybody has read Jen Pahlka's book, Recoding America, this is something that she really calls out as a problem in the development of technology. And this also pertains to other types of projects like building rail and transit, where without that state public sector capacity, the public sector contracts to contractors, and contractors and consultants are great. Ian is a consultant. They are skilled, they are knowledgeable, they are helpful. But if there is not enough state capacity to manage the contractor has an incentive, doesn't have, doesn't have the right incentives. You need that strong state capacity to run that project. And this really interesting slide shows how much state capacity there is for building highways, which is huge, and how much state capacity is there for rail, and it's tiny. And this is another opportunity where doing big reform will take multiple years, but there might be some opportunities for some pilot programs in 2026 to start going down this path. So I will stop there, but the capital project reform is a really fruitful opportunity for legislation to make our capital projects more cost effective.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for such a great, thorough analysis of the funding mechanisms and also the policy implementation and the legislative work that's underway in California to make our transit not only more abundant, but more efficient and more seamless. And I'll do a quick plug here. Here at Forward California, we do a lot of work to create deliberate policy platforms that consider things like this that maybe aren't the most glamorous, but are very, very important. So if anyone, in Seamless, or if any of the audience wants to get plugged in and learn more about these policy intricacies, just reach out to us and we'll start having those conversations, because I think we need to have a lot of public literacy of these types of, initiatives and legislation in order to have it actually move forward. So, all right, with that, we're going to start our audience Q&A. We have over 10 questions that have been asked so far, and just about 15 or so minutes to answer them. So whatever we don't get through, this is a note to the audience, whatever questions we can't answer, or if you come up with more questions later, you can email us and we'll find the answer for you. We can get you in contact with the panelists. We'll do whatever we can to ensure that you're learning everything that you can. But with the 15-ish minutes that we have left before final remarks, let's get through as many questions as possible. If we can keep it around a minute or two per answer, that would be great, but some of these deserve more time than that. So I trust your discretion, panelists. I'm just gonna go down the list. So the first question is, I love the seamless transit map that you showed earlier at the beginning of the presentation. Even with this huge improvement, I worry that people's homes or destinations will still be too far from their nearest transit stop to use it. What is your perspective on this? Will there have to be some integrations with rideshare, Uber, Waymo? How do we get people's front doors and their local transit authority more seamlessly connected?
Ian, do you want that or should I take it?
Yeah, I can think it just briefly. Yes, especially in lower density environments, in like single family home neighborhoods, it's not ever really going to be. You're never going to be able to run a frequent bus or light rail down, and that's within a 5-minute walk of every home. That type of infrastructure should go. That's one reason why they get land use and promoting dense land uses near the transit that we have and elsewhere, so that we can support more transit is important. But for those environments that are lower density, having that integration with what people sometimes call first mile, last mile options. So good bike connections, good bike facilities, walking facilities, scooter share, having payment be integrated between scooter share, having the actual seamless handoff between those services, incorporating those features into the user interface of how we pay for transit. Those are all important parts of trying to get as many people to use transit. I think services like Waymo and ride hailing more broadly, really, there isn't the space that those can be an important part of promoting transit, or they could actually undermine transit. I think in our vision, we'd like to see those services really bring people to those high quality transit stops, so that especially when we're going through dense parts of the region, folks are taking transit and not taking up, not driving, because the urban areas cannot support everyone in their own Waymo trying to get in a one-seat ride to their destination.
Thank you for that answer. And thank you for the question. And I'll just add an interesting factoid, which kind of was inspired by the first mile, last mile thing that you mentioned. A study by the DOE showed that more than 50% of rides are under 3 miles long. So transit, transit, but also bikes and good seamless bike infrastructure. If you have a bike advocate in your community, support them, because it's hard work getting these bike infrastructures actually connected, so that you're not in a dead end or you end up in the middle of like a neighborhood with no bike lane to take you out of it. So yes. All right, next question. How do we advocate? This is a very good and Bay Area relevant question. How do we advocate for more transit stops in areas that seem to be, anecdotally, against public transit, which was kind of what I was asking earlier, even though passing transit through them would improve travel times between locations? And the example they gave was from Walnut Creek to Dublin, Pleasanton, or Fremont, riders have to travel to Oakland and transfer, versus, something more seamless, for example, through Danville. But again, there is that weird public opinion and that slight, dare I say, transit NIMBYism. So how do we advocate for transit to connect cities more directly?
So I think this ties pretty well with local politics, because the response to local NIMBYism is organizing. And there's a really great success story in the Bay Area this year where a transit advocate, there was a proposal to have bus lanes and bike lanes on Stevens Creek in Cupertino, which is historically not a hotbed of support for transit, active transportation, or land use densifying for that matter. And they organized. They, got other people working with them. They went to the city council. They educated the city council members and got a favorable decision. So that is local organizing. And then that could be, running for office or getting people elected that are supported. That's local politics.
Love it. Thank you. Absolutely. Starting that conversation and organizing, like you said. Love it. All right. Next question, I'm going to ask the next few kind of in one question. Does the Bay Area have something like a network manager or a decentralized or syndicated version of one? Is that the MTC? How do those work with regional agencies and economic development corporations? And then I'll also ask, does Seamless work with these network managers such as, the MTC? And if so, how do you guys determine where there might be redundancies in the network? And and what about potential opportunities for route extensions, such as, into Livermore? Anyways, over to
So
you guys.
very briefly, I think MTC is, I mean, it's been a core part of our advocacy to try to create, we don't have a functioning network manager that like really functions at the level that it needs to be, like the way that, in these global best practice examples. And it wasn't this way 5 years or 7 years ago when we started, but there's sort of been a consensus emerging that MTC is as we've provoked this conversation and forced elected officials and gotten more people talking about it, there's been a sort of alignment around that MTC is the logical agency that should be fulfilling that role. And so it's doing more and more. It's sort of built, they for the first time have a staff group whose job it is to actually coordinate service and coordinate fares and coordinate wayfinding. So that's a huge success, but that's still a very small group and they're still kind of figuring it out. And so we expect them to be taking on more and more responsibilities over time. And that's actually how these effective network managers in other places also got their start. In terms of like consolidating lines or finding redundancies, that's a thing they don't yet do. So that is something that we hope they will do more of, basically play a more active role in actually planning the network. Right now, planning each, say, where bus lines go, that is something that MTC doesn't do any of, and they sort of say to the 27 transit agencies, they just sort of, their hands are off and they say, they expect, that level of coordination to say, hey, here's two agencies you're running parallel or kind of complementary service. How about we run like one thing instead of two, or we run it in a more efficient way? We're not there yet, but there's work to move in that direction. And then I think that's sort of basically work in progress, but that's kind of a core. We didn't talk so much about that. That's the sort of incremental change that we're working on.
And I'll say a little bit more specifically, because the Bay Area did set up a network management structure that is not yet at the ideal form that what we want, but has helped to move forward the improvements that we've talked about in this presentation. And it's going through a 2-year review that it was intended to say we're going to take stock at 2 years about what's going well and what we want to do better. So for folks that are either in the Bay Area or want to learn lessons from this from elsewhere, we're going to be having some public forums on this in partnership with Spur. In general, and also on some of the specific topics like how to really do much more coordinated planning based on goals, as opposed to every agency taking their favorite project and stapling them together. So I am going to put a sign up form. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, I'm just going to give you a generic sign up form. And if you scroll down and if you're interested in getting in, following along with that, or with some of the state capital reform opportunities or some of the ballot measure opportunities, you can sign up there, say a little bit about what you are interested in, and we will follow up with opportunities to plug you in, whether it is like with any of the things that we talked about.
All right, thank you guys. So now I'm going to jump around in the Q&A a little bit and give SoCal some love. So we have a question here that says, in San Diego, we have a great Sprinter train that travels from San Clemente to San Diego. One issue that we've had is that it breaks down a lot. Do you think that's a maintenance issue, a funding issue, or perhaps just not one of the most up-to-date trains or softwares or technologies? It's one of the biggest reasons why I don't use it more often.
I will speak a little bit to it, although I don't know as many details as the Bay Area agencies. In the corridor between LA and San Diego, there are multiple agencies that are each somewhat underfunded and uncoordinated. And Senator Catherine Blakespear has been a real leader in this area in getting some bills passed to study those issues about why is that corridor overall underperforming. And that is going to be coming out with some recommendations in the next few months about improving the maintenance and reliability and coordination of that overall system. One of the problems is that they have several small agencies, none of which have the resources that they need to really do a good job. So,
Yeah.
Ian, do you have some more on that?
Yeah, I think it's trains are really expensive and complicated, and rail infrastructure is. So I think it's like there's probably several things at play with the lack of reliability that are contribute to the lack of reliability on that line, and it requires and yet that line is run by something called I think a joint powers authority. It's by we have these very scrappy little agencies that run these intercity rail systems, and we need I think looking at how we do this with more reliable funding in a way that actually invests in those expensive infrastructure projects. It takes years to address these things, to build the infrastructure in a way that's resilient to climate change, where you're investing in those things that are the signaling and the traffic improvements that are gonna make sure that that train always runs on time and be on the logistic technology. It's something that is best done at the scale that is larger than one single transit line. So I think this is one of the things coming out of the state task force is recommending that the state take a more active role, as Adina was saying, in creating standards and supporting these local agencies that run service but are not necessarily always well positioned to be investing in these long-term infrastructure and technology and fleet improvements that are how we get better, more reliable transit.
Thanks. That was very educational for me, even not living in SoCal. I just think in general. So, all right, we have like 4 more minutes left for Q&A. Let's try to squeeze in as many as we can. This one should be hopefully a quick one. There's a Seamless Bay Area online store, but it seems to be password protected. How can I access the store, if at all?
You can email. I don't know if we have any merch right now. We at one point had an active store. We might have some leftover merch. So if you email our colleague Kaleo, and I believe his email is on the email. If you just email any of the info@seamlessbayarea.com and say, do you have any merch? He'll let you know, or he'll let you know if we have an upcoming. We do every twice a year, we usually have like a new merch item that's associated with like a fundraising drive. So you certainly should get on our mailing list, and then next time we have a new item like a t-shirt or something else, we will definitely notify you that way too.
Good, because we all need to rock the Seamless Bay Area swag. So I'm already on the email list. I hope you all get on the email list too. All right, next SoCal question. LA voted for an additional sales tax to fund metro expansion. This was a game changer. I don't have a sense of how large these transit systems are. I think LA is much larger than the others, and I think that the sheer number of riders are much larger. So I guess the question is, can you maybe shed some light a little bit on the kind of disparities in ridership across the state? And do you have a little bit of information to share about this tax measure and how LA Metro is maybe improving or changing, or what's going on there?
Yeah. So I know that pre-pandemic, LA, just in terms of riders, LA Metro was actually not the largest agency in the state, but it is now. So LA has had a more robust ridership recovery than the agencies here in the Bay Area. So it is, but in terms of ridership, it is, and I don't have the exact figures, but I believe it's, it is larger than say Muni is, SFMTA is the Bay Area's largest agency, which has, I think it used to have 700,000 riders a day. It's down to 500,000 riders a day. I think LA Metro's closer to 1 million riders a day. So it's not much larger. It's larger, but there's a higher overall rate of transit use generally in the Bay Area. So even though LA has a much larger population, LA Metro is in terms of overall number of, I think roughly about half the riders in transit are in Northern California, even though we're not half the population. So there's lots of transit riders all throughout California. And LA Metro now is definitely the largest agency in the state. So the investments that they're making in extensions, they approved in 2016, I think $100 billion ballot measure. So that's by far the biggest ballot measure that's ever been passed in the state, and it's huge. And it was a major source of inspiration for us here in the Bay Area because we've never passed anything at that scale. I certainly hope, I was just down there. There's lots of new things opening. I think it is going to make a really important difference in making transit more competitive in the LA region.
Thank you. All right, last question. And if we didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry, but you can contact the co-chairs. You can reach out to us, ask your question, and we'll get an answer for you. But last question before we wrap up is, given the financial situation of our state and many cities, what is the best financial argument for investing in public transit? Is there data on a return on investment, or is it mostly seen as like a public service more than a profit or for-profit, nonprofit, whatever? What is your thought on that?
I should go ahead.
Go ahead.
There is, I was just Googling a report. There are reports written on this, and it is, I wish I should have like the talking points right away to be able to say it, but and I can quickly try to find something. But no, it has massive benefits in terms of for the environment, on public safety, in terms of noise. They're all monetizable benefits. So there are economic studies that show, for every dollar that we invest in public transit, for every additional rider, it isn't just the person who's riding it that's getting that benefit. Entire communities. It's helping our public health. It's reducing our healthcare costs because fewer people are getting injured because of those safety rates. It's for every person that's not driving, it means less people getting in accidents and needing to pay insurance and relying off of having a disability for the rest of their life. So there's really big economic benefits, and I just don't have a specific. I can try to find a link to something that if you want to send out a thing afterwards, you can.
Yeah, and another element of that overall ROI is the thing to compare it against is to compare to car infrastructure and like very low density development. And a low density development pattern has is much less cost effective in terms of the amount of economic activity you can get in one place. And so for a city having a public transit system and then being able to have things that are walking distance from each other, you wind up getting more economic activity in that location and having to amortize less sewer systems and water systems and so on. Like sprawl is expensive. Towns does a really good job of explaining how sprawl is expensive. And transit is really the essential thing that you need to do to not have that uncost-effective sprawl development pattern.
Amazing points. We had a webinar a few months ago with Strong Towns. So if you guys haven't seen it, go visit our YouTube channel. The conversation is there. And with that, I'm going to share my screen for one last final remarks. And while I'm doing that, If you learned something new tonight, which I hope that all of you did, please put it into the chat so that we can all know what you learned. Personally, I loved that slide about the safety of trains versus cars. And I thought that this economic benefit conversation was also incredibly fascinating. But I loved it all. This was awesome. So first of all, I want to give a huge, huge, huge thank you to our amazing panelists who joined us for a whole hour and a half tonight. Thank you so much, Adina. Thank you so much, Ian. All of our audience, if you can give them a round of applause from wherever you are. I also want to thank our audience. This happens because of you. We love educating, informing, and having conversations like this a couple times a year. So just thank you all so much for calling in and engaging and interacting and asking questions. This is the website and the logo of Seamless Bay Area. Please check them out online, join their mailing list, join their events if you're in the Bay Area, reach out to them, learn more, support their efforts and their initiatives, because they're advocating for all of us. They're advocating for us to have easy transit options to get to from point A to point B more safely, more efficiently, with the comfort of being able to read your book while you're in the train. So support Seamless Bay Area. They're doing incredible work. And one last note on behalf of Forward Party as well. You can visit our website if you want to learn more about our organization. If you want to join our organization, we have a Slack workspace. That's where a lot of our volunteer collection happens. So go ahead and join our Slack workspace. If you want to register to vote with the Forward Party because you want to empower alternative parties and create a multi-party democracy, you can scan the QR code on your left and register to vote. And the last note I will say is that we are going to be sending an email shortly with a Polis link. And if you don't know what Polis is, it is a real-time system for gathering, analyzing, and understanding what large groups of people think in their own words, enabled by advanced statistics and machine learning. So it's a very elevated, advanced digital democracy survey tool that we have started using to collect public opinion about certain topics. So we're going to be initiating a survey about public transit, and we will send you all a link via email shortly. Click on that link, participate in the survey. It'll be really fun to hear what you guys have to say. With that, are there any last remarks from our panelists?
Yes, thanks so much for having us. This was a fun and far-ranging conversation, and it's really been great to meet you folks at this event.
All right. Thank you all so much. Have an amazing night. Go ride a train this weekend if you can, and we will see you at a future conversation.